welcome you this morning to the Mayor's Conference on Job Creation and Workforce Development. Thank you all so much for coming out this morning. Job creation and workforce development, as you know, is a top priority for Mayor Vincent C. Gray. That's why we asked you all here this morning to be a part of the discussion for helping the District of Columbia to develop its strategic plan for workforce development. You all are strategic partners in that planning process, and we look forward to a fruitful discussion with you about where the District of Columbia is in workforce development and where we should be going in an attempt to help District of Columbia residents who are seeking employment to find fulfilling and sustaining employment, and to also help our businesses that are here in the District of Columbia to gain the talent that they need for their businesses. So without further ado, I bring forward our mayor, Mayor Vincent C. Gray.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I want to thank everybody for coming out today to participate in what we think is an exceedingly important experience, and that is continuing to focus on something that has to be at the top of our list of priorities. I want to, first of all, thank PNC Bank for once again hosting us here in the city, and especially Mike Harold, the regional president, for his commitment, continuing the commitment to our city. And also I want to thank Mike for hosting, or chairing, I should say, the Workforce Investment Council, which we've spent a lot of time on. I also want to thank AOBA. Is Nicole Whiteman here? Oh, there she is. All right. I want to thank AOBA and Nicola especially because they have donated the breakfast, the lunch, and you're taking everybody out to dinner when this is over with too, right? No, we're not doing that. Today, I think you know, we're here to talk about workforce development, and we put together what we think is a thought-provoking agenda to be able to do that. That will help us to identify the challenges and opportunities that are available to us to continue to move forward in that area. I want to just share briefly with you what we have set out as the reason why we're here. First of all, and I'm going to quote this from information that you may have already received, and that is, the goal is to create and sustain a high-performing workforce development system that results in job creation and produces employment, of course, for people who live in the District of Columbia. One of the things is, I think, to help people understand what a workforce development system is. It's one of those terms that we use, but I'm not sure that there's a common understanding of what that is. Within that context, there are 4 objectives: to develop a common understanding of some of the opportunities and challenges that face job seekers in the city. Secondly, to share and discuss best practices in the workforce development field, both locally and nationally, and you'll hear some of those from our panel this morning. Thirdly, to use what is presented and discussed to inform the vision as well as key objectives for the district's 5-year strategic plan. And you'll hear more about that, which we launched just a couple of weeks ago. And then fourthly, to promote the participation and buy-in of a wide range of stakeholders, because without that, we're not going to be as successful as we otherwise might. As I indicated, you're going to be hearing from a panel of nationally recognized experts who will help us understand the dynamics of supply and demand in the labor market, both in the District of Columbia and in the metropolitan area. We were just talking about whether we are confining ourselves to the District of Columbia per se, or the metropolitan area. And frankly, we would be remiss if we looked only at the District of Columbia, because we are an integrated region, and it would be a lost opportunity to not focus on what goes on in surrounding Maryland and Virginia, because they obviously focus on what goes on in the District of Columbia. We're also going to hear after that from a panel of employers in key sectors, and they will tell us what skills are needed to enter and succeed in high-demand occupations. And even though we've been in a recessionary economy, we continue to have areas where there is a great demand. I guess most importantly, we're going to ask you after that to participate in a series of discussions that will focus on how we can build and sustain a first-class, world-class workforce system right here in the city. And then we'll break for lunch, and you'll hear from Tom Friedman. And I hope you've read Tom Friedman's book. If you haven't, you'll hear about it today, and I know you will rush home immediately at that stage this afternoon, grab a copy of it, and not put it down until you've read every word of it. It's entitled "That Used to Be Us," and it is a very sobering and compelling statement of where America is in the world today around our economic development and workforce preparation. We know that creating jobs and economic development opportunities is hopefully one of the 4 priorities I established, including fiscal stability, having a quality education program, which is inextricably tied to workforce development, and then, of course, having a safe environment, which we know contributes also to people wanting to work in the city and feeling like they can work. I don't think there is anything more important, frankly, than workforce development, and that's why we've spent so much time in these months focusing on getting people ready for jobs. Our unemployment rate is still high in the District of Columbia. We should feel good about the fact that we have come from 11.2% when we started this journey last year to the stage now where we are at last data we got last Friday indicated that our unemployment rate has dropped almost 2 full percentage points. It's down to 9.3. But that kind of belies the reality. The reality is if you go to one area, the west end of the city, you will find employment rates as low as 2.3 or 2.4%. But go to the east end of the city. Go to Ward 8. Go to Ward 7. Ward 7, where even though it's down to around 15%. And in Ward 8, the unemployment level is still above 20%, which is completely unacceptable, and in many instances is more than just about getting people a job. Obviously, to be able to attack those kind of fundamental problems, we need a multifaceted approach to those issues. 2 weeks ago, I joined with our Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, Victor Hoskins, to launch a first-time economic development strategy for the District of Columbia. We now have 16 MBA students who are traversing the city, meeting with lots of people. They are students from George Washington University, Georgetown University, Howard University, and American University, and they are engaged in a lot of focused interviews to determine the views of a number of people, and some of you may be interviewed in here or already have, in 7 selected industry sectors that include obviously the federal government, because even though we're trying to broaden our economy, the federal government continues to be the area of that contributes the most to our economy and the area where we have the highest level of employment in the city. Beyond that, professional services, education and health care, which is a huge area of employment for the city, hospitality, technology, which we are focusing a great deal of energy on. We won't talk a lot about St. Elizabeth's today, but in the budget, that was just my budget that was just approved by the council, there's $113 million over the next 4 years to invest in infrastructure upgrades at St. Elizabeth's on the east side, principally to be able to establish us as a principal player in the technology arena. We have legislation before the council right now, which I hope they will adopt before they go on recess in the middle of July, that does a number of things, not the least of which is establish the District of Columbia in its entirety as a technology zone where incentives are available to people, and then also reducing the capital gains tax. We have the highest capital gains tax for these kinds of investments in the region. Maryland is like 6, I don't know, 7. Virginia is 6. We are at 8 3/4. This legislation would reduce the capital gains tax down to 3%, which would make us far more competitive for investments and help us to retain technology firms in the city. And then in addition to that, we're looking at retail and real estate as well as construction. The Strategy Advisory Group members will serve as interviewees, and there are a number of those, and I won't detail who they are, and all have been selected as a result of their expertise in the industries and areas of work endeavor that I just cited. And then we'll use this process as a roadmap. This is not going to be one of those long, protracted processes that go on for 18 months, 24 months, or however long until we start the next planning process. This is very truncated. There will be a draft of the plan by mid-August, and then in September we will have the final plan that will then be used as a roadmap to move us forward. So in about 2.5 or 3 months, you will see the plan. So again, it is obviously critical that we be able to work with you. I think many of you know that we launched as one of our efforts the One City, One Hire program last September. And the idea was to be able to immediately jumpstart, immediately infuse into our efforts to get people to work something that would identify the jobs that exist, that need employees, and the people who are looking for jobs. We had no idea how successful this would be. We had seen a program similarly in Atlanta, but I don't even think that was run by the government. The government was involved in it, was not involved in it, but we used it as a way of generating ideas to get people back to work. Today, as a result of that program, I'm really proud to say, and I want to thank so many people who've been involved in it, that as of this past Friday, we've gotten to work 3,300 unemployed residents in the District of Columbia, which has markedly helped to bring down our unemployment rate. In addition to that, I was pleased to be able to appoint a person who I describe as a reform-driven director, and that's Lisa Mallory, to head the Department of Employment Services. There was a time, I see Alexis Roberson out here, she was one of our outstanding DOES directors of a number of years ago. There was a time when DOES really did focus on employment. But it got to a point where people would describe DOES as a place where you go to apply for unemployment, which seems perverse to me. And we decided we wanted to be able to change that. So we've been focused much more on trying to help DOES realize what its mission, what its vision is, and how it fits into a larger workforce development effort. We also reconstituted, rejuvenated the Workforce Investment Council. In fact, we had the first meeting right in this room. It essentially was dormant at that point. Mike Carroll stepped up and said he was willing to help us be able to move forward with the Workforce Investment Council. And we brought on board a new director, Allison Gerber, from the Aspen Institute, and they have been moving forward assiduously since. We have 33 people who comprise the Workforce Investment Council, who really represent all sectors of concern about workforce development here in the city. We also, and there are people in this room who know well this journey, and that is trying to move the community college of the District of Columbia toward independence. For those who've been around this was the goal in the first place. And it still remains the goal, and that is we wanted to incubate it as a part of the University of the District of Columbia, but eventually everything grows up, and the community college has grown up. The community college actually has an enrollment now that exceeds the flagship university. I don't know, 2,000 to 3,000 people are enrolled in the community college, and that should surprise no one, because when you look at community colleges across the nation, they in fact are increasingly attracting people who may not at that point want to pursue a four-year degree or pursue necessarily any degree. They are pursuing something that will prepare them in the immediate future for a job, and that is what the CCDC has done. And I see Connie Spinner over here. She has been a stalwart in helping us move this along. And Connie, I want to thank you for the work that you've done as we now continue to move the CCDC toward independence. We also, where's David Burns? I know he's in here. David is a national expert on TANF, and that certainly contributes, the TANF population contributes mightily to our unemployment rates here in the city. And David has been successful in 3 different states in helping to reform TANF. The District of Columbia did something a number of years ago which I still can't quite figure out. The TANF rules, when it became TANF, and by the way, the T stands for temporary. Everybody with me? Temporary. Every other state moved to implement the rules that you can stay on TANF from day one for 5 years. The district did not do that. The district decided to move towards investing its own local dollars and being able to sustain people. And frankly, I think all we have sustained is dependency. And we haven't done a lot of people a lot of good. We are now working to try to make sure that we take the plan that's been developed and implement that in a way that is intended, and that is to be able to give people reasons to go to work. Dave and I had a long conversation about this on Saturday up at Banneker when we were rolling out the One City summer program. And he has done a great job in just about a year in putting together the framework, and now we've got to make sure the resources are there. The council, unfortunately, took some of the money that we had intended to go into training, assessments and training, and has invested in sustaining benefits. Now, on its face, who's going to argue with people continuing to get benefits? But what I argue with is not so much continuing to get benefits, I argue with keeping people dependent, keeping people at a place where they can't go out and earn their own money, and that is precisely what he is trying to do, what we're trying to do with the TANF program here in the city. We also have established now, working with the council, a workforce intermediary. It is a best practice here in the city and across the nation. We have established 2 areas. They will be managed by the Workforce Investment Council, and that is hospitality and construction. We know that there are jobs in both of those areas. We will work with the council. We've put $1.6 million into the budget for the workforce intermediary, and it will result in people getting jobs and moving on. So we've got a lot more work to do. I'm excited about the fact that we have begun to bring down the unemployment rate in the city. But frankly, you've got to look at who is in that unemployment sector. And that is initially people who had skill sets and fell into, into unemployment because of the recession. We've now gotten a lot of those people back to work. We've now got to look at the fact that we have a lot of people who may have limited or no skills, or people who really are victimized by a variety of other circumstances that keep them from being able to work. And that's why we've got to have a systematic approach that we're talking about today, and we'll continue to move forward. So that gives you hopefully an overview of what we've already done and what we want to continue to do. This is kind of never ending because there is no point, I think, in which you can say you have a perfect workforce development system, or you have the system that is good for everybody. It's got to continue to be a dynamic process. And to help us start to understand some of that, we want to hear from our first panel. First of all, we'll hear from Jeff Stroll, who's from Georgetown University's Center on Education and the Workforce. He's going to provide us with a picture of supply and demand in the district, as well as the region, and some of the challenges that we're facing to expand economic opportunity for D.C. residents. Secondly, we'll hear from Maureen Conway, who is Executive Director of the Economic Opportunities Program at the Aspen Institute. She will talk to us on some of the key employer-driven workforce strategies that are being implemented across the nation to be able to ensure that job seekers are getting the support that they need. And then thirdly, we'll hear from Neil Ridley from the Center for Law and Social Policy, CLASP, which does a lot of work in a lot of areas. He's going to talk to us about proven strategies for helping those with low literacy levels and other barriers get into jobs and sustainable career pathways. So again, we appreciate you coming out on this exceedingly important subject. And please join me now in welcoming our panel. Each will take a few minutes to talk to you, and then we'll try to reserve some time at the end for a few questions before we move then into our employer panel. Thank you all very much, and you may proceed as you wish. Jeff, do you want to start?
First of all, I want to thank you all for having me here. I'm a long-term district resident, so I think it's an extremely important event that's going on here. So I'm here to kind of present the context of which developing economic opportunity for the residents of DC is nested in, and it is a particular challenge. My wife had wanted me to title this presentation The 50 Shades of Gray, but now Golden Mayor has a sense of humor. So I decided to go with the Metropolitan.
He's uninformed, isn't he?
Yeah. So I decided to do this as the Metropolitan Challenge. And I'm really glad to see that there are a lot of ground level folks here, because you're the ones who do this type of stuff. And by I've had some discussions about my presentation, and people are worried that I'd be leaving with a, there's nothing we can do, and just throw our hands up and quit. Dealing with people on the ground, you really know the answer is rolling up our sleeves and working with what we have and being realistic. I'm trying to set the realistic context of what we have, and I really think it's important that the responsibility here is doing economic development balanced with providing economic opportunity to the residents of the city. It's extremely challenging. So let me move forward. There's a cold, stark reality of the Washington, D.C. labor market. It is basically facing national, international, and regional competition for its well-paying jobs. Any city in the U.S. would be extremely challenged with what D.C. is faced with. This is very similar to what we see in New Mexico, where they're trying to tailor the university system to compete for jobs in Los Alamos, which is the national laboratories, where they in fact are competing against MIT. This is very similar to what we have in D.C. And as we'll see, education is the leg up in Washington, as in any labor market in the United States. It really separates the haves from the have-nots in our modern economy. So, okay. So the D.C. labor market swells daily. About 400,000 people come from the outskirts of D.C. into the city. About 87,000 residents leave the city to work out of the city, and about 158,000 residents work and live in the city. So that's where the competition for the residents comes into hand. So anyways, back to education correlates with earnings. So I'll show you a couple of quick pictures here. If you look at this, this is the map of the local area of households headed by BAs and above. The darker the color is, I've got black and white here in front of me. The darker is the color, the more likely a household is headed by a BA or above. You notice it's very thick as we go out into Maryland and Virginia, and it's thinner as we get into DC. Let's look at the distribution by income. See the red dots? That's where the money is. That's where the people who have benefited by their education are. And regretfully, they're not in D.C. Now, let me just go back and forth a little bit here. Here's where the BAs are. Here's where the earnings are. BAs, earnings. Did I mention education is highly correlated with earnings? So, what do we do? Well, we need to identify where opportunities exist. We need to figure out what our target populations are, and most importantly, we need to work with employers to generate new opportunities. I don't mean that the responsibility is fully on the employers, it's just to make opportunities. I heard a story from a friend of mine who worked for an international economics organization in DC, and he told me, we're getting candidates now for administrative assistance positions for $38K a year. We're getting master's students and MBAs. And when I'm comparing them against the residents of DC, I'm taking those masters, and I said, why? He says, because they move up in the organization. This is what we're trying to do with the residents. We're trying to work with the employers to create economic opportunities for the residents of this city. Education is important, and we'll see why in a minute here. If we look at the jobs in Washington, D.C. now, these are only jobs in the district, but the pattern is very similar in the area. We notice that it's what I call a bifurcated market. There's a bunch of jobs on the lower end of the distribution for people with high school or less, very few jobs for AAs, and then at the top there's DC has the highest percentage of job requirements for people with post-secondary education in the country by tune of about 15 percentage points. Okay, so it is a market that demands education as an entry requirement to work, and this is what we need to work on as we try to uplift our citizens to economic opportunity. And the ugly fact is, if they're not in jobs that have education, they're going to be more likely to be earning less than $27,000. I use this as an arbitrary threshold. It's the poverty rate for a family of 2 times 1.85, which is the outer bound of eligibility for free and reduced lunch for students in school. So if we're in high school or less, 44% of all jobs held by people with high school or less earn less than $27,000. That's a combination of low pay and not having access to full-time, full-year employment. So it's a combined effect. So how do we do targeted workforce development to focus on the development of career pathways using increased education? Well, we have to realize what we have. DC is unique. It's a bimodal labor market. There's jobs at both ends of the spectrum. We have to recognize where the opportunities lie. There's only one decent paying job for an AA for every 5 low paying high school or less jobs in the district. There are 4 good paying jobs for a BA and graduate degree holders for every low paying job held by people with some college or less. So our idea here is if you use education as a treatment to alleviate poverty, you have to understand where it's to go to. So in this idea of developing career ladders, we want to get people into work, but have them continually upgrade their education so that they get access to the opportunity that is correlated with education in DC, as is all other markets. Very briefly, I just wanted to say, what are the DC jobs? I've kind of done just a massive overview on the industries, looking at the red are some things I'm going to pull out in a second. Professional, health services, other services, and public administration. These make up about 59% of all employment in the Washington, D.C. area. And what are these jobs in the sense of opportunity? Let me see if I can get this above. There we go. So if we look at the professional industry, 17% of the jobs in that industry are under my $27,000 benchmark. In health services, 28% are. Other services, 22% are. In public administration, 7% of the jobs are underneath my artificial threshold of $27,000. As you go across the row, you see the percentage of people who, by degree level, are receiving $27,000 or less. And again, it's an arbitrary threshold. Make up whatever you want. In D.C., it's probably higher to really have what we would call family-sustaining earnings. The point that I want to make here is that if we look at developing career ladders, and we just take a look at public administration, overall, there are 12 good-paying jobs in that particular industry for every 1 bad-paying job. That's telling us, and then the next, as you move down, for high school or less, if we're to give them some college, it gives them access to 6 good-paying jobs for every 1 paying job. So for every low-paying high school job, if we give that person some college, they have access to 6 jobs that pay well. The only problem is it's a game of musical chairs. We have to understand that there's actual natural churn and turnover in the labor market that only opens up about 20 to 30% of the necessary jobs to take our impoverished population up to a good paying job. So we have to have slightly longer term strategies than just a year at a time. But we need to give people education to compete in this labor market. If you don't buy that, I think you're on the wrong page. So how do we use education to provide economic opportunity? Well, we can use new and existing data to help youth and adults target appropriate jobs. And this is where your workforce development people come in. They've got access to some great data about both projections, where jobs are going to be evolving, and what jobs exist in the area. Now, this following chart is about Kentucky. I didn't do this, but it's the kind of things that we can do here in the area. It's called a bubble chart. And what you have is we've broken the quadrant into jobs with high growth, high demand, high wage, low wage, high demand, low wage, and low demand. As you can imagine, we don't want to target the bottom left, low wage, low demand. We want to start to target and understand what kind of opportunities are going to exist over the next 10 years, and we can annualize that in the high wage and high demand sectors, and then understand the education needed to get people into these jobs. And again, this is Kentucky. This is not Washington, D.C. But it's just an idea of the types of things that we can do and need to do. Face the realities of the local labor market and then work with it. Now, policy changes can help change the picture of data, but that's we leave that one up to the governor. I mean the mayor, sorry about that. I am tired of it being a district and not a state, but that's another story. So anyways, so to end, we need to work with employers to create career ladders that will help workers enter good jobs while workers advance to higher degrees. I can't overemphasize the importance of this. Get them into work and help employers understand that the development of human capital on their shop floor is one good way to create talent that moves up the chain inside of the organizations. So, thank you.
I don't need that. Thanks, Jeff. And thank you all for being here this morning and inviting me to talk with you. As the mayor mentioned, I'm Maureen Conway. I'm the executive director of the Economic Opportunities Program at the Aspen Institute. I don't have a PowerPoint this morning, and I will try to stand up tall so you can see me over the podium. Sometimes it's a little challenge for me. Maybe I'll walk around a little. And what I want to talk about is sort of to take a different tack. I think Jeff laid out, a lot about sort of the need for education and the challenges. And when Allison and Kermit talked to me about coming and speaking with you all this morning in a session titled Overcoming Obstacles and Challenges to Achieving a High-Performing Workforce Development System. So I thought about, sort of what have I seen organizations do over the years? And I've been working in industry-specific or sector-focused workforce development for a long time now. We'll just say over 10 years and not count too specifically. And so I was thinking about, so what have I seen organizations that have been successful, that have achieved good outcomes for the folks who come through their doors, year after year? What have they done? What are some of the things that they do to build their organizations to strengthen themselves so that they can provide good services in their communities? And so I sort of wanted to sort of structure my remarks around sort of five themes that I think have sort of come up over the years in my observations of these programs. And I should say, I've observed them through doing evaluation work where I get to talk to not only the program leaders, but to the participants, to the employers who hire folks, to their partners in their communities, to their funders, and to, sort of a wide range of stakeholders. And so it's been a real privilege to be able to do this work, and it gives a nice perspective on sort of how they accomplish what they accomplish. And also as a frame for that, I should say, I think Jeff laid out nicely not only the importance of education, but the importance of thinking about specific industries and specific sectors. And as I mentioned, that's been what I do. Not all jobs are the same, not for a variety of reasons, not just the education that's required, but also the kinds of on-the-job behaviors that are needed, communication skills that are needed, all kinds of things. And understanding industry dynamics is really important. And so I've looked at programs that focus on that. So I sort of take that as a given and not a lesson. I'm sort of thinking about other things for sort of implementation rather than strategy. So one of my lessons is, so I'll say them quickly and then kind of go back. Focusing on building strong relationships, focusing on providing high quality services, sort of quality rather than quantity, quality first. I'll sound like Ford, quality is job one. Multiple funding streams have to be managed. That's just life. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll try to speak. Is that better? Here? Okay. Multiple funding streams have to be managed. Pay attention to organizational infrastructure, sort of the non-sexy stuff. What is our staff development plan? Do we have, the right people in the right jobs? What does our data systems look like? Those kinds of things. And then the last is that it takes time, right? It's a multi-year process, and I think we're sort of hearing that again and again, and I'll just come back to it. It does take time. It's not a one-year thing. It's a longer horizon. So I just wanted to go through those, sort of unpack them and provide a few examples. You do have one of our more recent publications, which has more detail on some of the examples I mentioned, and we have other publications. I'm certainly happy to take questions as well later. But relationships. So relationships are important, and we're going to hear an employer panel, which is really great. Employers are one of the most critical relationships. And so in thinking about relationships, one example that I think of is the Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership in Milwaukee. So they've done a great job in building employer relationships over time, developing a strong and dense network of employers. They focus on manufacturing and construction, sort of skilled trades, occupations within their region. And a couple of things that they do. So they engage employers on their board, but they also work with employers to think about who's the right trainer. It's part of their staff jobs to go out and talk with employers individually, one-on-one, find out what's going on. And they have different ways of organizing their work to do that. And what they, and one of the things that's been a result of that is what I hear from a lot of organizations that I work with is, oh, we had a great relationship with this one company, but then our contact at that company left, and now we're sort of starting all over again. And they've sort of turned that around at this point to, we had a great relationship with this company, and then that person left, and they went to a different company that we didn't have a relationship with, and now we do. So they really, sort of have built this dense relationship. Again, it takes time, But I think that that's a really critical piece. But employers are not the only important relationship in this picture. So they rely on, because of their model, which they think of as a pull model. So let's hear from employers, what do they need, and develop training programs that are going to go on top of sort of candidates that have some basic skills and some other skills. So they have really important relationships with other community-based organizations in their community, that they know what's required, that they can go back and forth, that they support what they're doing in terms of some of the other kinds of supports and other kinds of basic education to get folks ready, and sort of developing this mutually supportive relationship. It's not just one organization, and it's not, so those kinds of relationships with other service providers and relationships with the students and trainees themselves are also really critical. So thinking about building strong relationships, how are you building the relationships so that you're bringing value to those folks as well as them bringing value to your organization and what you're doing. Quality. Sort of one of the things I've noticed, and I've heard time and time again from organizations, sort of how in the early years when they were first starting, what they were trying to do was do one thing and do it really well and get some attention for doing one thing and doing really well and getting that to be the building block of what they do. And that was the key to sort of building a strong relationship that led to another strong relationship that led to another. So these are two sort of mutually reinforcing elements. And one person I think of here in terms of just really kind of bringing that not just to the employers but also to the students they work with is a woman, I'll call her Yolanda because that's her name. She runs she runs the Hartford Jobs Funnel in Hartford. And she, it's this naming thing, I'm good at it. And she's really tough, not only with employers but also with students, to say, I'm not going to recommend you to they again work in construction trades. I'm not going to recommend you to the solar panel installer who's hiring, or to the or for an opening in the electrician's apprenticeship, which you're qualified for, but you haven't been, really sort of the behavior has not been right or whatever's not been right. You have to meet all the competency standards. And again, it's not just that you can pass a test, but it's also that you know how to show up on time, that you know how to communicate with your peers, and those kinds of things. And she's very tough on that, and making sure that she's reinforcing quality both with her students and with her employers, and like I said, it's a mutually reinforcing relationship. Multiple funding streams. I could probably talk all morning about the challenge and the need to manage multiple funding streams. I'm going to combine this with my next one, which is organizational infrastructure, because these two things, and because I see Kermit waving his fingers at me, because these two things go hand in hand together. So over the years of doing this, one of the things that we've talked about is that because it's multifaceted work, right? There's all these different stakeholders that you work with. For students to get the skills that they need to get good jobs, right? They need skills, they need education. They also need some supports, right? So often there's managing of social supports, childcare, transportation, other kinds of needs in their life. They need counseling. They need to know they need to know some of this labor market information and what that means for what it takes to get from here to there. There's a whole range of things that need to be done. So it needs a variety of different kinds of resources. There's no, it turns out, one funder that funds all of it. So you just need to figure out how do you manage multiple funding streams, and how do you build an organization that's strong enough to manage those multiple funding streams well, to report on them, to manage their different time frames, their different requirements. But it's really critical, because what you're trying to do, again, is to bring the right kinds of workers to the employers that need them, right? And so the employers are not asking, do you have any TANF recipients? Do you have any youth funding, right? They're just asking for the good candidates. So you don't want your case managers to say, you'd be good for this, but we only have, the food stamp money left, and you're not a food stamp recipient, so we can't take you, right? You want them to be doing the match based on who you are, what are your skills, what's your interest, how do we help you get to the employer that needs you. And so the multiple funding streams is important, but also this strong organizational infrastructure. My example here is an organization called Capital Idea in Austin, Texas, and they provide a wide variety of case management and counseling services to get their students through 1- and 2-year degree programs at the Austin Community College. They look particularly at healthcare as well as at the energy sector. And the thing that's amazing about them is a couple of things. So one is, just this managing multiple funding streams. If you look at their funding year on year, it's like, and you take sort of, this is federal money, this is state money, this is our local city money, this is philanthropic money. It's like a spaghetti map, right? It's like all over the place because funding changes year to year, over time, and you have to have staff who can be involved in a variety of conversations in the community so that they know, all right, the state's probably going to cut this, but I can probably get somebody on the city council to advocate for this so we can get this piece, and this will, help us keep this going. We should think about this philanthropist over here because they're developing an interest. I can get this person into, right? This is a big job. This is a big job, and you need strong staff and you need a strong organization to do it. So the organizational infrastructure, the other thing that impressed me really about Capital Idea, I was visiting with them, talking with them, they were talking about they're using technology. They've done this whole technology audit. They were getting their case managers on campus more and out in the community more and not in the office so that they can serve more students, and how they were using this to bring their operation to greater scale and greater efficiency. And talking about this person who was their one person on staff, who was sort of their trainer and manager of their database. And I said, wow, she's a really important person. And how did she get to have these skills? And what if she leaves? What are you going to do? And they sort of looked at me and they said, wow, she's the one person we don't have a replacement plan for. They had one for the executive director, for the deputy director, and they didn't have one for her, but they went out and developed one like the next day. They really think about staff development. And the way they had developed this person who was so critical to their organization, she came in at a low level, but she had an aptitude and interest. They supported her. And I think this is just a really critical thing to think about. We're in workforce development. It's about developing people's skills. And too often, we don't pay enough attention to the skills of the people who are actually staffing the workforce development agencies. What are they coming in with? What do they need to get better? How can them getting better support the whole thing getting better? And what do we do to support that? Too often, sort of these kinds of things are seen as fluff and overhead and something that can be cut when the budget gets tight. But they're really critical to building a strong organization. The strong organization rests on the strong people. And so my last point was just that it takes time. And we have a colleague who likes to describe how building an organization and planning for sustainability and fundraising by, you have some assets, and you use those assets to create change, and people in the community value that change, and that brings in more assets, and you sort of develop this virtuous circle. And I think when you think about building a strong system, you want to find those bright spots in your system that are really your assets, those things that are really good, that you do really well, and build on them and shine a light on them and think about how they can get bigger and stronger over time and create more change and help more people in the district get the skills they need to get the good jobs that are being created. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's good to be here today. CLASP is a national organization that focuses on developing policies and programs for low-income individuals and families. And during the past few years, especially, we've been thinking a lot about strategies for job seekers who need to improve their basic skills in order to enter the workforce or advance in the workforce. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on today so that we can, before we move into our question and answer period. I think for individuals with limited education and skills, it's a real challenge to make progress because of the disconnects in our education and training system. And I think this slide is meant to try to convey that sense of disconnects and lack of connections. Adult education and English language classes are often disconnected and may not lead directly to training that generates a job. Developmental education courses in college may not be connected to the occupational offerings at the college, so that students have to figure out how to navigate that connection. And more generally, occupational education training may not be aligned with employer workforce needs, may not be based on data or relationships. Now, career pathways are getting a lot of attention around the country as a way to address some of these disconnects. In essence, a career pathway is a series of education and training opportunities that are linked to job opportunities at different levels. each step in the pathway is designed to lead to the next job or the next credential at a higher education level. And this chart, this chart is meant to show the concept of the career pathway with a series of education training opportunities tied to those job opportunities. Students can enter a pathway at different points depending on their level of preparation. So those with lower education and skill levels will start at the beginning, and others will jump in. And they can also exit at various points into employment. Career pathways are generally organized around industry sectors or occupations. So, many career pathways that are being developed around the country are in manufacturing, healthcare, transportation, and other business services and other areas. Now, a key component of a pathway, which you can find at the lower left corner of this slide, is a bridge program. And a bridge program is designed to make it possible for those with low education and skill levels to actually get into a pathway. It's the first rung, really, for those with lower education and skill levels. It's an on-ramp, so to speak. And now I just want to focus a minute or two on bridge strategies. There are 6 key elements in a bridge strategy or a bridge program. And the first element is what most people think about when they think of a bridge program. It combines basic skills and occupational skills. So a student will be improving their reading and mathematics skills, and also learning how to take blood pressure, take temperature, or other occupational skills. Contextualization is another key element of a bridge program. So basic skills are taught in the context of an occupation or industry. So for example, a student that's learning reading will learn how to read a blueprint or do another technical reading assignment. Another element is most bridge programs use new curricula or modified curricula that include contextualized content. And they often involve new ways of teaching. So one common way in some programs is to have team teaching for the students. An academic instructor will work alongside a vocational instructor with the class during the session. Another way to go is to have paired courses. So students will be concurrently enrolled in a basic skills, adult education, or developmental education class, and also enrolled in a career and technical education course. So they're improving their basic skills, and they're also working on occupational content. Supports are necessary, need to be are a key part of a bridge strategy as well. Advising, students need help with advising and navigating the college or training marketplace. Also, students may need childcare, transportation, other services. And finally, bridge programs have to be designed with employer needs in mind, as everyone on the panel has emphasized up until this point. Employers have to be at the table with bridge program development and have to be involved. Here's an example of a bridge program that's actually embedded in a pathway. And this example comes from Chicago, where a community-based organization has worked very closely with a college to develop a bridge program aimed at public housing residents and other low-income residents in the city. It's an 8-week bridge program in the healthcare field, in this case, and it's designed to move individuals up to the 9th grade level so that they can then enter a certified nursing assistant program, for example, or other career tracks. So it's meant to boost the basic skills and get them introduced to the field so that they can then move on. And this chart shows the pathway. Actually, it shows a number of the pathways in the healthcare arena with the bridge programs at the bottom of the chart. That's the entry point for those with lower basic skill levels. The partners in this initiative have different roles. They play different roles. The community-based organization helps to recruit participants, helps to recruit and screen participants for the program, provides supports where necessary, provides one-on-one assistance. The college provides the curriculum, of course, and updates the curriculum, and also provides the instruction. And it's important to note, given, as given Maureen's mention of multiple funding streams, that this program actually relies on more than one funding stream. Workforce Investment Act, you're probably familiar with. Workforce Investment Act Title I funds are used by the community organization to provide the supports in some cases, to provide coordinators that help the students navigate, provide tuition in some cases. WIA Title II, or adult education funds, state and federal, are used by the college to provide instruction. So this is a good example. And then other grants are used as well, of course, but those are two examples. So when we look at the Chicago program, and I don't have time to go into other examples, but there are, of course, other examples. When you look at the Chicago example and other examples, I think one of the key lessons is that no partner can pull this off alone, right? That it takes a team to pull off a bridge program and of course, a pathway initiative. This table from this slide is drawn from the Department of Labor Career Pathways Toolkit, which is a very good resource. And it highlights the key partners that can be involved in a pathway initiative and their roles. So for example, workforce agencies can help to provide labor market data and analysis, as Jeff mentioned, can help to recruit participants, identify support, provide supports where necessary, and can help, of course, on the job finding end. Colleges can help with the curriculum, provide the instruction, and also very critically can help assist with access to financial aid for students that are eligible and for programs that are eligible. Community-based organizations can help also with recruitment, provide supports, provide one-on-one assistance. Employers, of course, can help in the curriculum development process, can also lend their facilities or equipment for particularly intensive training, can provide internships to students that are moving through programs, and of course can hire graduates that are coming out of the program. So, and of course, other partners are critical as well. Human service agencies can help with recruitment from various programs and provide supports. Economic development agencies can also help with engaging employers and identifying labor market data. Now, I've also compiled some resources. I'm not going to, I think I'm at the end of my period here, but I just want to point out that I've compiled some resources on career pathways and bridge strategies that may be useful to you. CLASP has a toolkit on funding career pathways, and here are some of the resources that I've mentioned during my presentation. I think we'll be interested in, during this question-answer period, to learn about where you are with developing or thinking about pathway initiatives and bridge programs. Thank you very much.
All right, we want to have an opportunity now for a dialogue to some extent between you and the panelists. I want to start with a question which is a broad one. I'm not even sure if it has a finite answer, to tell you the truth. But each of you has talked about this from a systemic perspective. What do you envision as the role between quote-unquote government and the private sector, recognizing that the private sector has multiple stakeholders in it? If you look out here, you've got those who are involved with organizations that train people. You've got universities that are represented out here. You've got the Chamber of Commerce that is represented out, all of whom have a fundamental interest and stake in the notion of getting people back to work. But each has a specific role to play. And it makes for a very complicated and complex endeavor, to say the least. So what do you envision as being the role between the role of government versus the quote-unquote private sector?
I'd like to take that. I mean, traditionally the role of government is its ability to take long-term risks where the private sector doesn't necessarily have the ability to do so on their kind of what we call time horizons. So making an investment in the residents of the city to prepare them to enter into work, to provide, as Maureen said, they don't care if it's a food stamp recipient, they don't care where the person's coming from. What they care about is do they have the set of qualifications going into there. So developing the longer-term vision of investing in the citizenry, figuring out where they need to go, and also from a data perspective, your workforce development agencies have access to data that, employers are extremely helpful, but they have proprietary business information they can't necessarily drop into the pot. I'm opening a plant, I'm closing a plant, where the government has the ability to utilize larger data systems, say, here's the trend, and then speak with government, with employer partners and say, this is what we see happening, what do you think?
So just to add to that, so that's a really big question, first of all. But one of the things that came to mind is, and that I've been thinking a lot about, is sort of what's the role of government or sort of publicly funded agencies versus the private sector in terms of this whole skill provision piece, right? So a lot, we used to have more thoughts that people would get an entry-level job and then would advance within a particular company. That doesn't always necessarily work, so people need to leave and go back and get further education. But I think that there's a lot of capacity among employers. They know what they want, they know what kind of skills, and I think that we need to think of sort of new and creative ways to bring together sort of education and training providers and employers and sort of collaborating in the training process and really making that more both targeted to what employers want, but understanding that there's certain kinds of things employers can do really well. We keep outside of the employer context trying to contextualize education. Why don't we just bring it into the employer context and then build some basic education around it and think of a more collaborative approach? So I think that typically those roles have been fairly separate, and it would be helpful to see them brought a little closer together and combined in a more creative way.
Charlie?
When I look at what jobs are going to be available, high-wage, high-demand jobs, and they are things like physical therapists, dental hygienists, occupational therapists, radiation therapists, diagnostic medical sonographers, respiratory therapists, for example. I would conclude that if I were constructing a curriculum for elementary and middle school students, I would have them in biology and have them focusing on the areas in the curriculum that would prepare them for these kinds of jobs in the future. And to the extent that you have more young people who understand the body, and if they're going to go into these fields, they'll be better at it when they get there, and you may create a career path which goes further. And honestly, further in developing some African American or some people of color physicians, because there won't be many soon. So that's a career path. So here's my question. My question is, if you were curriculum developers in the elementary and secondary schools, what curriculum focus would you ask those developers to look at, given what you know about the job market now and the developing job market?
If I was to sit here today and tell you that your sixth grader ought to be looking at a particular job in the labor market, which would be about 15 years later, I would be doing you a great disservice. So looking at the curriculum development in that period of time, from my perspective, often tries to break it into foundational set of core competencies that are needed for the labor market, and then the closer they get to the labor market, refine the curriculum to point to those particular jobs. And so that would be my first thing to say, is try to understand what the cores are. I mean, as Maureen said, there's a set of stuff that makes the whole package. And labor market competency speak, it's client face-to-face interaction, it's critical thinking, it's problem solving. And as you get closer to the labor market, then I would really be focusing on exact and specific skills. And just so you know that chart that was for Kentucky, I did not have the data for DC, so just don't take that back or to advise people.
Are these data available?
Those data are available for DC, yes. So just that pretty chart isn't. Someone else did that much smarter than me. But this raises a point to your question, Mayor, about what government can do. A lot of these data and approaching things from data talk about what used to happen and how we understand it as a trend going forward. Governmental policies and initiatives change the path of history in what's going to happen. So your initiative with technology. the labor market projections for the market of DC for 10 years won't include that because it's not incorporated in the data stream that feeds projections. So when you do governmental initiatives, that changes the structure of things.
I want to thank our panel. I thank Jeff, Maureen, and Neil for giving us a really good start to all that.